Please feel free to try to make your way through the room, find a seat. We are delighted to have Smarthouse Creative here tonight. Brad Wilke and Ryan Davis, who's over there. They're fresh in from Sundance, and I'm going to let them take it from here.
All right. Hey. Thanks a lot, Kate. I'm glad we have a microphone because I just got my voice back yesterday. So feeling pretty good, though. It's great to see so many people here and many familiar faces. So I want to thank Office of Film and Music, Kate, for everybody putting this together and all the supporters, Spitfire, everybody. So thank you for coming out. And this is probably the third or fourth time that we've delivered our Bridging the Indie Gap presentation, and it really is a practical guide. So if you go on to our Facebook page, like the post that I just put up there at like 6:10 has our worksheet that accompanies this presentation. So if you want to go there, check it out. It's a PDF. You can download it, and I'll talk a little bit off of there. But the idea is, so I'm going to try to put this into a 25-minute space. But the idea, as I've said, is that there's not a lot of fluff here. And what we're trying to do is pass as much information, as much experience, as much like data that we've discovered over the last 2 years or so out and kind of in a framework structure. So this mostly applies, it was built around filmmakers, but it also applies to musicians, any kind of indie artist, authors, like anybody, especially who's doing stuff that lives mostly online as a digital format, but you're also looking to generate offline interest, so that sort of that holy grail idea of online to offline and back and forth. I think that's sort of the crux of the problem or the issue or what we're really trying to solve. So just want to set a little bit of context before we get fully into the presentation here. So there's our contact information. This will also come up at the end, so you can connect with us, ask questions on Twitter, email us questions. Especially here in Seattle, we want to be as open and as available as possible for anybody who has questions about any of this stuff, or where to start, or even more like experience questions too. We can really get into the weeds. So how many people have heard or maybe read Nicholas Nassim's book, The Black Swan? Aha, I see a couple hands. That's great, because usually nobody has read that book, and I feel like that's one of the books, along for me personally, with Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. Taleb's Black Swan is a book that I come back to all the time, and it's a book, I think, expressly written for creatives who are trying to find a foothold in an industry that is often winner-take-all, that is very difficult. The barriers to entry are huge, and there's a lot of different ways. There's not one single way to approach success. So this image up here is obviously of a white swan, and there used to be a saying in Australia that was about as likely as seeing a black swan, when it was referring to events that the likelihood of it happening were basically zero. So that saying made a lot of sense until one day, of course, somebody discovered a black swan. And then people realized, well, okay, so I guess there are black swans, so now we have to change our entire way of thinking about X, Y, or Z. And the idea behind this book that really drives through, and you can find podcasts that Taleb gives, which are kind of great little breakdowns of the book itself. But the idea that black swans are, if anybody was paying attention to Sundance yesterday, within the last 48 hours, a new movie called Birth of a Nation just sold to Fox Searchlight for $17.5 million. It broke, the record at Sundance. It came close to the record at any film festival, which was $20 million. But that right there is what would be considered a black swan. I think another great example of a black swan is Kevin Smith's first film, Clerks, that went to Sundance. It sold to Harvey Weinstein, and then it launched his career, and everybody reads the stories. Hey, this guy made a movie with credit cards, and he maxed out his credit cards. He took it to Sundance, he sold it, and then he's got a multi-picture deal with Harvey Weinstein. That could be me. And as most of you know in here, I heard some laughter. That is not you. So and sometimes I have to caveat this and say that, this is not meant to be cynical, this is not meant to be negative, but it's more like tough love. So when you're out there thinking about your career, whether that's in filmmaking, writing, music, whatever it is, don't think of yourself as the Black Swan. Don't think of yourself as the exception. Think of yourself as the standard bearer. Think of yourself as the average case. And then a lot of these tools that we're going to talk about, a lot of these tactics, a lot of these strategies, and just ways of thinking are what can help you take those white swan scenarios and turn them into something that's viable, into something that's sustainable, but also keep you open for a black swan opportunity. So that doesn't mean that, obviously they happen, but they just don't happen all the time. So that's the other thing. They're looking at the idea of the snake oil salesman, somebody coming up here and saying like, hey, it's so easy. Have you ever heard of social media? It's the wave of the future. VHX, put your movie on there. You're going to sell 1 million copies. I don't think anybody sold 1 million copies of their movie on VHX here. It's tough. It could happen. That's a black swan scenario. But I just also want to say, like, there is no like magic bullet or secret formula to do this kind of online, offline engagement. It takes time and it takes effort and it takes getting to know your audience, all these things which are part of what we have come to call bridging the indie gap. Because as we all know, it's not an even playing field no matter what you read or hear people saying like, well, everybody has access to free tools now. You can post your movie online and you can monetize it and you can do all these different things, but so can everybody else. So what that does is it creates a situation where the barriers to entry are very, very low and there's very little competitive advantage. If you were the only person in the room or in Seattle or in America who had that access, then yes, that's great. You could probably really leverage that and make something of it. But because you don't, just keep in mind that it's not a level playing field and there are well-worn pathways that people take, not, I would say, people like us all in, like, but, if you're coming through, sort of like the back channels of the entertainment industry, people are going to get better placement on iTunes. People will get better placement. They'll get more promotion on blogs. Like, it's tough. Like, so no matter how good your product is, like, there's still all these other factors that you're up against. So again, just keep in mind, it's not as level of a playing field as people may think, which is where the indie gap comes into play. So this is kind of the framework that we've developed, but also are developing. So this is definitely a work in progress, and this landscape changes day by day. It's really hard. You got to keep track of stuff, and new things happen, laws change, all sorts. So it really behooves somebody to really pay attention because this stuff is changing all the time. So here we are all, in the land of the day job, and that may be a day job that we don't like doing. That may be something we're not passionate about. That may be something that we have to do to make money for other reasons. I mean, I have 2 kids at home. I have a family, so I can't just sit around expecting that this screenplay that I'm working on is going to sell for $1 million and that'll take care of it. So all these, the 2 years that I've spent on it, if I figure out, divide by, 2 years into that time, it's like I've been earning $20,000 a day writing a screenplay. Like, that is not a good way to look at it. And then up there in the top, sustainable creative career. And as you see there, there's the indie gap right there in the middle. So here's the practical steps that we've developed and worked on and kind of kicked the tires on of ways, one potential way to get from land of the day job up to sustainable creative career. And we'll make this deck available, if people want it. So, and we'll come back to these. I'm going to walk us through each of these steps as we go. So probably the first thing, as we all know, is that we all have audiences, and it really makes sense to know who your audience is. And that goes much deeper than thinking like, well, everybody's going to love this movie. Like, this is a movie for everyone. And oftentimes it's not. Almost always it's not. So knowing who is going to connect best with your content, whatever that is, and there's ways to figure that out. So when you're on the film festival circuit, when you're in pre-production, when you're talking about it to people, when you're pitching it to people, you can kind of see, you get an idea of where this might be aligning, where you might be able to position this finished product at the end. And if any of this also sounds too business-like, I don't mean to like look at film or music or art as a product or a widget or something like that, but I think it's important to think about this in, again, as practical a way as possible and consider the business implications and consider the crossovers and the alignment and the overlap from traditional business into creative work. So I'm going to talk off of the Bridging the Indie Gap worksheet, which aligns with this structure here. So if you found it online, you can follow along, but you can download it when you get back home. But basically, the questions that we want to ask ourselves, and this is where ideally this would be in a scenario where it was almost like a classroom. You have pen and paper, and you're writing this down as it comes to you. But who is your primary audience? So that should be one group of people that you can focus on, that you can build personas out of in a traditional marketing sense. We got to segment this audience, and we got to focus on and say, because you're sitting in the front row, I say, Lindy is a primary audience, and that's my persona that I'm creating for this marketing campaign or this engagement strategy. So then I think about all the things that Lindy might like, and I think, how can I reach them? What does she read? What are the things that she does? And what else might she be interested to see where a potential secondary audience might come into play? So this is a thing that goes well deeper than these first few questions about finding that audience, but I think the best way to approach this is as logically as possible and just move down the page. Here are the attributes, here are some demographics, here are the personas that I'm building. So if anybody knows, more traditional marketing, this is a very simple kind of process that people do every day, but often don't do it for independent arts. Sometimes distributors might do it or marketing companies, but often not the filmmakers. And if you can't afford that, it's going to fall on you or your team. So, which brings us to the next, and this is, part of that is developing your audience as we go through. So again, like I said, when you're posting stuff on Facebook, when you are sharing stuff on Twitter or Instagram, you get some good insight into who's connecting with that content, who your audience is, where they're coming from physically and even emotionally or psychographically. There's a lot of that data out there for good and bad, but if you know where to find it, and it's not that hard to come by, you don't have to have like a subscription to, like a Forrester's research to find out where, your audience is and what they look like and everything like that. You can get that on Facebook Insights, or there's a great tool that I'll tell about now, and it might come up later, but it's called Node Excel. And anybody who is in the MCDM program, I saw a few people here, probably know what that is and may have a love-hate relationship with it, but I would encourage you to begin a love relationship with it, because Node Excel is an Excel template that it's free, it's open source, it's developed by the Social Media Research Foundation. So it goes much deeper than, like something that would be like a follower wonk or any free app that's out there, because they're gonna block off a lot of the data and make you pay for it. But if you get Node Excel running, and it only runs on PCs, so you'll have to find a PC to run it on, or do a boot camp or Parallels if you have a Mac. But you can run it, and it pulls API data from Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Flickr, Weibo, a whole bunch, and it's growing every day. And what it does then is you can search by term, you can search by account, and figure out who is talking about the stuff that you want to find in your audience, that we want them to be talking about. So if you made, a good example of a film that we worked with here in Seattle called The Breach. Anybody seen The Breach? Mark Titus directed it. Yeah, it's a great movie, and and this works really well. Every film is case by case. Every piece of art is case by case, but oftentimes we found that a lot of these engagement strategies work really well for documentaries, especially that are documentaries that are cause-driven. Narrative films, it takes a little more effort. You have to do a little more planning. You have to get deeper in the weeds, and it may take a little more time. So the earlier you start it, the better. But with a documentary, you can find who's talking about sustainability, who's talking about the ecology, who's talking about pebble mine, who's talking about salmon, who's talking about farm salmon, and then see what those conversations look like. It'll pull out word pairs, it'll pull out most popular links that are being shared, who's talking to whom and where they're like how those conversations are going based on the vertices of the visual network that's created. So I'm not going to go deep. Like that's like you spend a whole class kind of doing that. But once you get the hang of this, you can really drill down and find out, where this stuff is at. You can use it in your day-to-day work. You could use it to help find your film audience. But don't just guess. I think is what this comes down to is when you are finding and developing your audience, be practical and be logical about it and be data-driven if you can. And I say that, I always say like I'm not a data nerd, I don't think. Maybe I'm becoming one, but it's kind of fun when you can kind of, if you ask the right questions, then you can drill down and your answers will be more and more relevant. So it's a process and it takes time and it evolves, but if you stick with it, I think there's big payoffs. So next step is building the team. So if you are an independent filmmaker or content creator, musician, artist, any of those creative roles, and you're sitting there and you do this on your own, you do it in your hovel or your penthouse, I don't know, either way, but and it's a solitary job oftentimes. And even when you get a crew together, everybody's doing the same job, or I'm sorry, like everybody's doing their specialized job. So you've got your DP, you've got your grip, you've got your rigger, you've got your script supervisor, on and on. And you wouldn't have, and I think this was something that Ryan mentioned during our last, I'm just crediting you with this saying. She's supposed to be keeping me on time here. I could go on a tangent, like I'm going on one right now. So the basic idea is that you wouldn't hire a DP and then ask them to do craft services and ask them to do all these other things, or ask the DP to also do your social media engagement or build your audience online or develop a digital strategy for you. So you don't have to do this yourself. If you are an independent filmmaker, that's what we're developing and putting this stuff out there for, is like if have the time and you can find somebody who is excited by this stuff about finding those needles in the haystack, then you could continue doing your creative work and pushing the project forward, while in parallel to that, somebody else is connecting with an audience, building that excitement and that engagement around the project, or pushing the cause forward if it's a cause-based documentary. So I think it's really important. So some of the things that you can ask yourself, and this is from the worksheet here, are, internally, you could almost do like a SWOT analysis, which I know is like another business term, and I don't know why I cringe about it. I don't think anybody else is cringing out there, but it's strengths, weaknesses, which are internal, and then opportunities and threats, which are external. So it doesn't even have to be that formal, though. I think just kind of looking at it from here, like internal, what are the talent or expertise gaps that are missing from your team? So if you don't have somebody who could do, producer, marketing, and distribution, that's what you might want to be looking for, and maybe not worry so much right now about craft services, but build these gaps, fill these gaps that are missing. And then, external, what are some strategic partners that you might be able to find, whether it is a documentary or a narrative film, that align with your themes or your issues or your cause, and get them on board early. And all that takes really is research and, and a interesting and engaging, I think, approach to them, and a mutually beneficial way. So it's not like, we need all this help, how can you help us? Like, if you're a filmmaker, like they may also need some footage for a brand video or something. So there's ways that you can do this without creating a sort of like an expertise or a talent differential between the two groups. The strategic partner actually will want to work with you. So, and then also, other filmmakers and content creators addressing similar issues. So not to look at other filmmakers as potential competition or content creators, but actually reach out and say, hey, it looks like we're working on a project that, has to do with ideas around the extinction of bees. So maybe we should, I don't know, share resources, or how could, what's your angle on it? Because that happens. So I also program films at SIF, and like one year we had 3 documentaries, I think, that were submitted about the bee population. And you can't play 3 documentaries, and that stuff happens, and you can't always address that issue by talking to somebody beforehand, because it might be an international doc or something. But again, bottom line is don't look at other filmmakers, other content creators as competition. Look at them as potential allies. And I think that kind of works, all around, be a rising tide kind of idea. So, and I mentioned strategic partners. So this is where we get into sort of the nitty gritty and this goal setting and strategy development. So this can be really dense, and what we've done in the past is shown an example, but I didn't have a chance to take out some of the more proprietary, like not to us, but to the project, so I didn't want to share it here without talking to the producer. So I can walk us through it though really quickly, and what you want to do is not just start and say like, well, I want everyone to like our movie, or I want this to be about raising awareness for the film, because that's really hard to measure unless you know what people's awareness was before you started this project. So when you're setting these goals, when you're creating these larger objectives, think about how can you measure those, because if you can't measure them, it's really difficult to see if you're making any sort of realistic progress toward the goal, and also if your strategy or the tactics associated with it are working. So you can't revise your strategy if you don't know what those metrics are that you've set up. So I'm just gonna just glance at this digital engagement strategy. So the objectives that we had here was increase organic audience engagement through social media driven partnerships with influencer groups, alumni orgs, and others, expand and deepen fan base across Facebook and Twitter social channels, and then drive VOD sales and rentals at their website, at the point of purchase on the website. So they were doing kind of like a day and date, but it was not exactly like a day and date. So I think what you also find is that there's so many different ways to put your film out there as far as distribution goes. So, and some theaters won't play a day and date because they're concerned that you're not going to do, and this is from a distributor perspective, but that the distributor won't do the kind of marketing that's required at the theater level, at the exhibitor level, which they don't always have the time to do, other than just putting a poster in the local news weekly, or maybe a Facebook post or something. And that's not enough to drive the kind of ticket sales that you need. And it's a lot easier in the exhibitor's mind to look at it and say, well, they're just going to push VOD sales, and we're going to sit here just kind of giving free publicity for them. So that's like definitely like a worst case scenario that you might consider. And it's not always the case. But when you're thinking about it, don't just think of it. So trying to like give like some like bottom line kind of thinking here is, don't think of it from just the filmmaker perspective, but think of it from the perspective of the exhibitor. Think of it from the perspective of the audience. Think of it from the perspective of the film festival. And then that helps inform your strategy. So you're not just have like one sort of perspective or angle on it. You want to have multiple perspectives, and that's where you get into the goal setting. So once you have set your objectives, and I would highly recommend that your objectives align with your bottom line business goals. So if that's selling tickets, or it's building an engaged or relevant fan base, you want to make these things so that you can trace it from your objective all the way down to your metric, and that's where your key results come in. So again, like this is exciting, but it can be dry, so I'm just going to give one. So we talk about expand and deepen the fan base across Twitter and social channels. So that's a key result. And then, that's the objective. And then the key result is maintain audience growth rate across social platforms, 3 to 5% per week. So you want to put a number on it. You want to put a time constraint on it. And I would always say, when you're building your dashboards, which we'll get to in a little bit, but just kind of gloss over, build it around rates. Don't build it around aggregate numbers or general numbers, because we've worked with clients that have had like 100,000 Facebook fans, and no matter what you do, you find that they don't respond to anything, even though it's right in the wheelhouse of the content. And then you start exploring further, and then you see that the fans, almost all of them, are men living in Pakistan, the vast majority, which wouldn't necessarily raise a red flag, but the organization is about supporting and raising awareness for women's below-the-belt cancers, so cervical and ovarian cancers. So you think, well, what do men in Pakistan have to do with cervical and ovarian cancers? And when you get down to it, it's probably not a lot, because nobody's engaging on this unless they're boosting. So it was a tough discussion to have, but say like this audience that you have is actually probably only about 1,300 people here in the United States and some of the Western European countries, but it's not as big as you thought. So don't focus on the quantity of the fans, focus on the quality of the fans, and if they're in the areas, and film festival people and other filmmakers and people, strategic partners. So you really have to think about that. And then creating true fans. So one of the things that we did is said we want to have 50 true fans that we could earmark and say, these people are really going above and beyond. And the way that we measured that is that they shared at least 2 updates with their own networks. And as you probably know, there's probably some people that follow your content or that support you that, 1 or 2 people that share the vast majority of stuff to their networks. And what you want to do is you want to get that so you've got 30 people doing that and 40 people, because as we all know, it's very difficult to get organic engagement on social channels because there's just so much noise. So even when you're putting out relevant content that's not just all about the film, but might be about issues related to the film and themes about the film and other tangential and potentially like secondary and tertiary content, it's still not all of it is landing. So that's something else, is like when you have your key metrics in place and you can start measuring that and you're building it on your dashboard, you can see, yes, this is working. And if you're not hitting it and it's not working, then you could say, well, not that we're going to change the objective necessarily, but maybe we're going to change our content strategy. So if you hear the word content strategy, you think, well, here's another thing that we have to do. Content strategy could be as simple as creating 4 columns that says, here's one topic that we want to cover, here's a second topic, here's a third topic, our cast and crew, their news that's happening out in the world. This is about our film playing somewhere. This is about issues related to our film. And then just start populating it. And you can pull stuff from different feeds, Google alerts. It's really simple. So it doesn't have to be this like 20-page document that you follow religiously called the content strategy. It's just having an idea and a framework of what you're sharing with your audience. So your key results. And then when it comes to, so this is just, there's a lot of words here. I'm not going to read this. You can read it yourself, or you can look at it in the deck at your leisure. But when we talk about digital strategy, these are the components that we believe should be in a digital strategy, and that you should be thinking about at a top level kind of viewpoint to say, how are we able to, is this scalable? I think that's a big thing that you want to ask yourself, because in the beginning, it's not scalable. I know that there's a lot of talk in tech circles, especially here in Seattle, like a lot of this, what we're talking about, aligns with what could be like a lean sort of development strategy. Like you're building this from the base up. You can't come out with 100% finished product, so you want to have like your minimum viable product digital strategy. And this is the kind of thing. So it's not going to be scalable at first, and that's good, because there could be a lot of hand-holding. There could be a lot of, like white glove style valet service. But then as it grows, are you able to scale that so you don't have to do that stuff all the time? Do you backfill your team with an intern that could learn from your digital strategist or your producer of marketing and distribution so that you can start expanding and growing? Because otherwise you'll hit these plateaus, and then you'll find that it'll be hard to move beyond where you are. So, when we talk about objectives and key results, so strategy implementation, like this is like where the rubber meets the road, and again is, it's already 7:07. It's just a nod to the folks watching at home on the recorded version. So strategy implementation, it's a big part of it is your budget, other resources that you have, so in-kind, volunteers, people that are going to get behind you, people that are going to support you, that are going to want to support you, and then your timeline. So put it into a timeline, just like you would with pre-production, production, post-production. Figure out, this is when our engagement strategy begins. This is when we start talking about stuff. This is when we get out in the community and do a forum about our topic that's covered in the film, or do like a album release that's like a secret album release, or whatever that might look like. But you got to have a timeline if you want it to work. And then metrics tracking and strategy revision, we talked a bit about, but again, focus on the rates. Focus on the rates. I'm going to skip over this though, so I don't want to go through anything too quickly and then miss some of the stuff, because I think if we just do some brief case studies. So kind of the way that we look at this, and I guess those case studies aren't connected here in this, but point is, there's been, like, when we were giving this presentation at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival 2 weeks ago, that very morning, Ryan had a client that was 4 women that were rowing across the Pacific Ocean, and we had gotten them placement on CNN, an interview on CNN, and that video just started taking off because we had posted it, we had embedded it on our Facebook page with links to the different tagging, so like building these posts, which take a little more time than just like putting a link in there and saying like, hey, look at this or check this out, but more like going deep and saying, here's the people who are involved, giving credit where credit is due, tagging people who should be tagged, and then the audience starts picking it up, so then their fans are sharing it, and then people are starting to like Smarthouse Creative in relevant categories, like other filmmakers, people that are journalists, because they see this going up. And that there was a couple other examples. Another one for The Breach was the battle between wild caught and farmed salmon. And I found a picture from the movie, and then because it worked so well, there's a video clip that we used as the film was doing its national tour. But this image of a piece of wild-caught salmon next to a piece of farmed salmon on a brown cutting board ended up, I don't want to say going viral, because that could be like so many different definitions of that. But what it did is it was shared over 1,000 times by people, and the comment section on the image itself turned into its own community forum. Like people, like it was like a Reddit thread or something. Like it had it drove engagement through the roof, and it was when they were screening in Alaska, and it was just, the timing couldn't have been better. But what that did is not so much like, oh yeah, drove all this engagement and it was good and all that, but it gave us a lead on, this is one of those issues that really gets people fired up in this community, in this film, is this idea of wild caught versus farmed salmon. And this movie is all about the importance of fishing for wild caught salmon and eating sustainably and the ecology and all the impacts. So that's a Black Swan kind of thing. Like, I didn't predict that was going to work, but you just have to like keep focusing, and once you get in that ballpark, then just try to like focus, narrow it down, and then you'll start seeing your content popping like that, and in really relevant ways. So not just like, oh, it's cool that people saw this or shared it, but they're talking about it and they know that The Breach is all about this. So it all comes back together. So I'm not going to talk about Filmmaker First or audience ownership, even though those are sort of like driving tenets of what we do. Well, I guess I'm going to do it because I think it's important. Filmmaker First, the idea is that it's not just about any one project that you're working on, but it's about you as a content creator, you as somebody who's putting new work out into the community, out into the marketplace, out into the world. So it's the idea of standing out in front of that content and saying, yes, I'm a documentary filmmaker or I'm a narrative filmmaker, but I just made this film, which is on the film festival circuit right now, and I've got this other film that we're crowdfunding, and then I've got a third film that's in pre-production or script development right now, and we could talk about all of those things, and you can share all of those things. So the idea, like I would recommend, and if you've already done it, there's no need to delete it, but as far as like pages or accounts for individual films, I would say use a hashtag. So don't have a Twitter account for your one film that ends up with 85 followers and it's only just about, hey, we're playing at this festival, we're here. Now it's available on VOD. And what's the incentive really for people to follow that? There's very little incentive. So build your own audience and then take them with you, the audience ownership part of this. So get yourself on Twitter or on Instagram or start a blog, or start a podcast. I love podcasts now. I'm sure like everybody has like top of the mind. Most of the people in here can say like, this is my favorite podcast I'm listening to right now. Podcasts are going through kind of a renaissance, which is great. But that is all the kind of things, but it just takes time to create that kind of content. But focus on Filmmaker First, your career, not your projects. Okay. And then, well, it's already 7:13, so that covers it. And if you have any questions, Ryan and I, and that's Allie right there, who's our intern right now, we'll be hanging around. We can answer questions, but also, if you want to request this deck, we'll give it out. No problem. The Filmmaker First, or the worksheet is available on our Facebook page, and we're also developing this into kind of an ebook format that will be constantly updated and isn't the kind of thing where it's like a loss leader, sort of like content marketing. It's an actual thing that you could use, to like further your career, to like make good decisions and data-driven decisions about where you're placing, where you're aligning your content and your career. But I feel like we're all lucky, like Seattle has a lot of resources for these kind of things, but it's also for the content creator in Nebraska where this might not be a thing that people are really aware of, and they could take that and use it and follow it through and work to make that a more level playing ground. So it's really about like the filmmakers, the content creators, and trying to find a way to create that sustainable career in an environment that I don't want to say it doesn't care, but it's really focused on sort of the blockbuster right now, and the auteur style director, and it's like a very small place at the top. But I feel like we can make the rest of the pyramid a lot wider if we go about this stuff smartly and do it in a way that's community supported and not kind of in our own towers trying to figure it out ourselves. So anyway, that's bridging the indie gap. I'm sweating like crazy up here. We're God knows how long over time, so I apologize for that, Kate Becker. And thank you for coming.